Are you in the market for an adventure that combines the supernatural, murder, intrigue, a mystery to be solved, and recent history of the setting involved in it? Then I have an adventure for you that can slot in perfectly into Act 1 of your campaign, and that is Eberron Gothic, The Curse of Thornwood. Hi everybody, I am Eric from the Geek Pantheon, and I am here with a special Dungeon Masters Guild review. I want to take a look at some of the smaller properties. I know I do book reviews on this channel from Wizards of the Coast, but I wanted to take a look at some of the stuff for offer on the Dungeon Masters Guild and see if there were any things that stood out to me, things that I wanted to share with you, and things that are popular that I wanted to give my thoughts on. And in the Eberron community, this adventure has been causing quite the buzz. So I went over to the DMs Guild, picked up a copy, read through it, and now I'm going to share my thoughts with you. Link to everything down in the description below. You can pick it up on the DMG for just under $10 right now, which, not to spoil the review, I think is a pretty darn good deal. Now, at this point, I'm going to address to all the players out there, if you are watching this to get an idea as to whether or not you should beg your DM to run this for you, I'm just going to leave you with a simple yes. I'm going to do an overview review here in a second, but it does start to get into the border of spoilery territory. So if you are a player, you don't want to cheat yourself out of this experience, so I will just say yes, go forth, tell your DM to go pick up a copy, or if you're feeling really nice, buy it for them. DMs do a lot of hard work. It would be a nice treat for your DM to pick this up for them. It is the holidays after all. And let them know that this is something you're interested in. It is very compelling. It's a well-written adventure, and I think it does what it sets out to do really well. So players, you may go now. Okay, now that it's just the DMs left. My overview review of it, just kind of a high-level discussion of this adventure. I think, like I said, it does what it wants to do really well. I think it is a really well-written story and has a lot of really compelling elements that can be built off of to go into a larger campaign. The adventure starts off in a very beautifully simple way. The party are guards for a noble going to a foreign nation on a mission. So that makes it very easy to slot into an existing game. If your party has just hit 5th level, which is the recommended starting level for this adventure, then you can easily just have them pick up where this adventure recommends that you start. They get hired to escort this noble, and you're on your way. The overall story of the adventure is also a very compelling one because it does tell an interesting story, and it does an excellent job of building off of what came before it in the sense of the obstacles that the party faces early on do a good job of building and building and building into the overarching threat that the adventure presents to the party. There are some deviations, but every adventure has that. But the core focus of the adventure does a good job of ramping up to the biggest threat that the party is going to have to deal with. And there's a clear story being told all the way through. It's not like a lot of adventures where you have the chapter 1 or act 1 that's completely detached from the rest of the adventure. It does a good job of integrating things to come in those early stages. So if your party would be a fan of supernatural threats, recent history of the area involved in this setting, tragic stories, and potentially morally gray villains and heroes, then this is a great adventure to run for them. And if you as a DM loves running a varied cast of NPCs that can play a significant role in the adventure and really feel like the story is integrated with the players and the characters involved can really develop an attachment to the player characters, then I think you're going to have a really good time running this adventure. And you also are afforded the opportunity, the way this adventure is written, to inject your own flavor into it. Like I said, potentially morally gray villains and heroes. You could have your villains and heroes be as black and white as you want, or you can introduce a fair amount of gray, but I'll get into that once I get into spoiler territory. I do recommend this is a good read, so if this is enough to compel you to go out and buy it if you haven't yet, or if you have bought it and just haven't read it yet, go read it. I think it's a really good, well-written adventure. There are some things that I'm going to get into that I think could be tweaked a little bit, some things that need some adjusting or just need to be prepared for as a dungeon master. So if you want to hear about those, stick around, but we are going to get more and more into spoiler territory as we move along. So I wanted to talk about real quick, if you are wanting to run this as a one-shot or just the kicking off point for a campaign, some characters that I think would work really well in this adventure. because that is a big part of it, having those characters that can really have an attachment to the story from the first session. I think Paizo does a really good job with their adventure paths of providing that player supplement guide to tell players, hey, if you're considering being a player in this adventure path, here's some ideas for really good characters that would fit in well. And so I wanted to do a very abridged version of that. In that, from a concept standpoint, I think characters that work really well, anybody with an affiliation to the Silver Flame, preferably a strong affiliation, anybody that's really bought into the church of the Silver Flame. A shifter of any kind would be a welcomed addition to this story, especially the way I would run. Any long-lived race that would have been around from 100 to 150 years ago and could actively remember the events of this area would do really well in this adventure and be able to contribute a lot, and the player would feel really engaged. And lastly, any ex-Chiron, anybody whose nation was lost in the morning. This adventure takes place just on the border of the morning for a section, and you kind of have to deal with a threat from there at one point. And so an ex-Chiron would have a very vested interest, especially in that section of the adventure. Now, the things that I love about this adventure, once again, getting more and more spoilery as we go on. First off, the background of the adventure that's provided in the introduction is a very effective way of conveying a lot of information, a lot of important information to the DM without giving us 5, 6, 7 paragraphs to write. It is concise, it is direct and to the point. It does assume, I feel like, a certain level of knowledge of Eberron. So if you're not super familiar with Eberron, you might find yourself lost in a couple of places, but it shouldn't be too big of an issue. But the introductory text in the background section is very well done. In the adventure summary section, estimated durations of each chapter of the campaign is wonderful. I think it's a really great just guesstimate. Now, granted, I haven't gotten this adventure on the table, so I can't speak to the accuracy of these estimates, but I think it's a great thing for planning out and thinking, okay, my party is really efficient. They're really like optimal for combat, so they're going to tear through combat encounters. And so they're probably going to go through these things quickly, so you can get a guesstimate on how long each section is going to take them, so you can plan out your session properly if you're playing for 3, 4, 6 hours. And then lastly, the breakpoints that are provided in this adventure. They give you, outside of the natural chapter breaks, they also give you opportunities during the chapters where it says this would be a fine place to stop. And it provides some additional text on perhaps right after this scene or right at the beginning after you've done the introductory text of the next scene. That's where you could call it. And I love this because when you're running a pre-written adventure that's broken up into chapters like this, a lot of times you can be compelled as a dungeon master sometimes, if you're hitting the time limit, you have some people that have a hard stop time, where you start rushing through things if you feel like you've fallen behind and you're trying to finish this chapter because you need that clean break point. And so you're rushing through, or the opposite, where the party has blitzed through things quicker than you thought they would, and you call the session early because you don't want to start the next section and have to call it in the middle because you know you're not going to make it through the whole next chapter. This is a great way of alleviating that issue because there are breakpoints right before the end of chapters, breakpoints right after the beginning of chapters. And so it gives you that buffer to where it's like, okay, we can start the next one. And I know that after a scene and a half, which will set us at right about the right time, I can call it there and we can move on. I really love that addition, and it's really smart. And one last thing that I absolutely love about the way this adventure was created and formatted and written is that at the start of each scene, so every chapter is broken down into a series of scenes, there is a simple little block at the beginning that tells you the objective of that scene, what you are meant to accomplish, whether it's the party meeting a certain character, being introduced to a certain element of the adventure. It has the primary NPCs involved in that scene, and it has some really handy symbols to tell you what type of encounters to expect in that scene, whether it's social, exploration, combat, or they're meant to find a piece of treasure, or any combination of those. You often see multiple symbols. And this is such a brilliant little handy tool for a DM to be able to just look really quickly as you're reviewing for the session, or if you have it open there as you're running it, just glance down real quick and know, okay, we're about to do some combat, so I need to prepare for initiative. I need to do this and this and this. So it's just a great shorthand and really takes advantage of the real estate they're given on the page. And I think that it's something that I would love to see more and more adventures doing, because I really do appreciate it. Additionally, in a lot of adventures that are pre-written, oftentimes when setting up a scene that takes place in an inn or just any other location, a fort, where you are meant to meet a lot of NPCs. There's a big group of NPCs, like various different individual groups, and you're meant to meet a lot of different NPCs and mingle and do all this stuff. A lot of times a pre-written adventure will give you the setup. You all are at an inn on this day, this thing is going on, and then it will give you the laundry list of NPCs, like where they're standing, and like this person's over here, and this is their function in the adventure, da 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 da, so on and so forth. This adventure takes that concept and actually breaks it down really well when the adventurers first get to the inn that they're headed to, in that you have all the different NPCs that are important in that scene, but they break down the adventure in a really good way that allows you to have a flow to it. It's when they first arrive, all the way through dinner service and post-dinner and time to go to bed, and it's broken down in a way with things that occur at each step that give it a nice flow that prevents you from just throwing the players into the inn and going, okay, there's all these NPCs, go meet them. So I think that was a really smart way to do it. And at the very end of chapter 2, going into chapter 3 of this adventure, you are introduced to a murder mystery. You find people killed, and it's up to the party to figure out what happened. And something that this adventure does is there is a sidebar dedicated to giving you the full timeline of the murder. What happened when and in what order, so that you as the DM can have a really simple, easy to look at reference to be informed in the role playing. And as you're giving out information, you're not having to read ahead in the adventure to gather all the information to then reference back. You have this really clear cut, simple reference to use. And before we move on, if you are enjoying this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, like it, and subscribe to the channel. We have plenty more videos like this coming out, and if you're enjoying it, we would love to see you back here next time. Also, if you want to talk to me about this adventure or D&D or anything else in general in real time, I do stream on Twitch every Sunday and Tuesday at 8 p.m. Central and Saturdays at 7 a.m. for you early birds out there. So come on over, links down in the description below. I would love to have you. Now, as a DM, things to look out for as you're running this adventure, things to be aware of as you're reading through and as you're running it, because there were some things that I thought, okay, these are things that if I were to ever run this, I need to have at the front of my mind as I'm prepping to run this adventure in order to do the best possible job I could. Firstly, one of the things that I absolutely adore about this adventure is the amount of social scenes and social interactions that you get with really compelling and really strongly written NPCs. But those scenes are contingent upon your party having the initiative to go engage with these NPCs. And if you have players that are a little bit timid when it comes to role playing and not comfortable just jumping out there and going to talk to an NPC, it might slow things down. You might have to nudge them in the right direction, or just adapt the adventure to have the NPC taking the initiative to come talk to the players if they're reluctant to go do that kind of thing. So there's something to keep in mind. Additionally, this adventure takes place in one centralized area of the world. And as a result, there is a lot of returning to previously visited areas and backtracking and really feeling like this is a lived-in area that the party will get to know really well. But what you need to do as the Dungeon Master then is describe how things are changing, describe how things are evolving over time after they've left the village of Bright Dawn and then they come back. What's different? What's changed? Because that will keep things fresh, that will keep the players engaged and feel less like, weren't we just here, like we're back here. Even though the narrative is strong enough to keep them pulling through, but if you want to really ramp things up to the next level, be sure to describe how things are evolving in these locations, because you're returning to them. And things should change over time. If the party is gone for 3 or 4 days with all the stuff happening in this adventure, yeah, have some different stuff going on. And there are a fair amount of elements in this adventure that will rely on you as a dungeon master to take the reins and color inside the lines kind of thing. Because this is not a pre-written adventure that's there to hold your hand through every step of the way. This is designed to provide you a really good adventure to use as a launching point to then use your skills as a DM to fill everything else out. A really good example is the murder mystery that I referenced. At the start of chapter 3, when the players are investigating it, they're given a lot of potential false leads, a lot of things that could point them in the wrong direction. But in the adventure, you're just given those leads. You're given the jumping off point. And if your players decide to pursue one of them, you need to be comfortable with filling out the rest of that storyline and setting something up to where it can really draw them in. If you want them to go down these false leads, you could also set them up to be really short paths and be like, oh, okay. And be like, oh, okay, it's obviously not them. But I would recommend fleshing things out and letting them chase all these different leads down until they finally land on the right one. And another example of this is the overarching story of the adventure and kind of going back to way before the adventure begins up through the end of the adventure. Now we're about to get into heavy spoiler territory, so if there are any players still sticking around, go away please. If you're a DM and you want to be able to read this before hearing the spoilers, go away. But if you don't care about that, you just want to hear my thoughts on it, the whole story revolves around the Silver Purge that the Silver Flame committed about 120 years prior to the adventure happening, where the Silver Flame tried to eradicate lycanthropy in Eberron because there was a lycanthropic plague going on. And you can pick a lot of different ways that this adventure, that the history behind this adventure can go, because it's left, I think, intentionally nebulous for the DM to paint things in whatever light they want, because the villain is the spirit of a lycanthropic wereborn necromancer that sacrificed their life to keep a portal to Lamania open so that other lycanthropes could escape, and everybody that took part in that ritual had their souls ripped from their bodies and trapped in these Kyber dragon shards. Now, obviously, it would be really easy and simple to just go the black and white route and say that this wereborn necromancer was evil and they wanted to infect as many people as possible, and they were just getting their minions out before they could be killed so that they could come back at a later date and finish their work, which would be a totally fine way to run this. You additionally do have an NPC ally who was not a member of the Silver Flame at the time of the Purge, but was attached to it and is now a member of the Church of the Silver Flame and coming to investigate things. So you have a NPC that is tied to the other side of this conflict. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can play this. You could flip it and have the party realize that the Inquisition was actually going too far and killing shifters, and just this group of lycanthropes in this village, near this village that they were coming after, weren't actually part of the plague. They were a peaceful group that were discovered, and this portal was open to allow them to escape because they didn't do anything wrong. Or you could have the same thing where the Inquisition's going too far, but these were actually evil ones, and so the only real victims were the people left behind, the village, and this cost of this kind of conflict just tends to permeate long after the conflict is over. Or, in probably my preferred way of running it, because this is just my kind of storytelling, you could have the opposite on both sides be true, that this was still at a stage where the Inquisition was good and seeking to eradicate the plague before they had started taking things too far and hunting down shifters and non-evil lycanthropes. And this was like that tipping point where the lycanthropes here were not evil. They weren't seeking to spread the plague, but the Inquisition stumbled upon them and still felt this code and this need to go after them, even though these lycanthropes presented no threat. And so then the leaders of this community had to sacrifice their lives to protect the others, even though the Inquisition was not inherently evil and just not trying to kill lycanthropes en masse, but still felt the need to go after them because they were told to go find the lycanthropes in this area. And having it be that morally gray situation of it being tragic that the disembodied spirit of this necromancer they're interacting with sacrificed her life for a very noble cause and saved a lot of innocent lives in the process. But at the same time, the members of the Inquisition that you can potentially encounter also weren't evil. They weren't trying to murder anybody, but they had a duty. And I think that's a compelling story to tell and to expose your players to. And I appreciate the fact that this adventure left it open for DMs to tell this story the way that they want to, the way that they think their party will respond most to. Because some parties are going to respond to my way really well. Other parties are going to respond to a very straightforward black and white conflict really well. And so I do like the fact that this adventure left things open, but it is on you as the DM, I feel like, to fill in those blanks, because otherwise it has the potential to fall flat without fleshing things out a bit more. And that is it. Those are my thoughts on Eberron Gothic, The Curse of Thornwood by Stuart Braz. And I really enjoy this. I think you should go pick it up. It's a steal of a deal at less than $10, in fact, on the Dungeon Masters Guild. Once again, link down in the description below. Go check it out. Comment down below what your thoughts are on the adventure if you've already read it, or if you plan on going to pick it up. And let me know down below which type of ending you find would most compelling, whether it's the morally gray across the board, black and white, or any combination that I spoke about. Anyway, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Eric, and I will see you next time.